Okay. Last week we were talking about Pesach and about the Seder and the composition of getting ready for Pesach. Just to briefly remind you, because I discovered, for example, a lot of people, even though I kept insisting to have a bar mitzvah or to be a bat mitzvah, you don't have to do anything but have a birthday. I got an unfortunate number of respondents that said you had to be called to the Torah or something else like that. Well, hopefully now you know.
Yeah.
Okay. And that in itself is important because we have to recognize that most ceremonies are meant to take make you aware of something more than anything else. Right? And sometimes the ceremony is only post facto necessary. For example, bar and bat mitzvah ceremonies, and they are celebrations. You go back 200 years, they almost didn't exist in the way we think of it. All right, you'll hear the old, no, not my generation. I realize now I'm the old timer. When I was a youngster, the old timers would tell you I was lucky for my bar mitzvah that we had a little piece of herring and a shot of schnapps to celebrate. Okay, so that's number one. All right, so please remember, I may be pedantic about it, and I've been accused of that, but it is not bread that is forbidden on Passover. It is leavened bread. Okay? And the way to remember that is that the blessing for a piece of matzah that we eat during the course of the year is hamotzi lechem min ha'aretz. It's the same we say on any piece of bread. And that's the same bracha, the same blessing that we say on matzah that we have on Passover. We do have an extra bracha that we will see tonight going through the Haggadah that talks about the mitzvah of eating matzah, al achilat matzah, but we only say that when we're eating the matzah as part of the Seder ceremony. The next day for lunch, when you eat a piece of matzah, you don't say al achilat. There's no mitzvah associated with eating matzah the rest of Pesach, according to most authorities. So therefore, there's no bracha other than the hamotzi for eating matzah during the rest of Passover. Right? So it is any, and the definition is any of the 5 species of grain, wheat, barley, oats, spelt, and rye, ground into flour, and allowed to mix with water and not be baked in 18 minutes. Okay, so that's the difference between kosher for Passover matzah and matzah you can buy during the rest of the year. That's not necessarily kosher for Passover. Right? Almost all kosher wines are going to be kosher for Passover. It's hard to imagine how you can have a wine that's not going to be kosher for Passover. However, it was explained to me at a program that I was at this past week about the only kosher winery in Niagara, that some barrels used to be sealed with a mixture of flour, and I don't remember what else was mixed with the flour, but that would be used to seal the oak barrels that they might let wine. And so therefore, that's the only possible way you might have wine that would not be kosher for Passover. But I don't think any kosher wine is done that way. Be aware of that. And there is some very nice wines that come from Niagara. All righty. Now, does everybody have a Haggadah with them?
Yeah.
Okay. You do not. You do not. I'll give you the famous, well-known.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that is probably the most popular up until recent years Haggadah that's around. And I have one quib. No, I have a problem with it that we will get to tonight. It's about the question I asked you to think about last week about the 4 sons. Okay. I'm going to pass around two Haggadot for you here to take a look at. These are not Haggadot that I recommend for the Seder table, just because of the size, amongst other things. One is the Haggadah Shechter, the Shechter Haggadah, Art, History, and Commentary. So it actually has the whole Haggadah in it, but as you take a few minutes as I pass it around, you'll see it has a lot of things about the history of the Haggadah and artwork. Especially one of the most popular ones is the artwork associated with the four sons and how they are illustrated. I'm going to tell you guys, why don't you move up closer, because it's just us here and everybody else there in the ether. The other one is actually there's an English version of it, which is a very nice, called the Family Participation Haggadah. I'm going to use that a lot tonight. And the editor is Noam Zion and David Dishon. And this Haggadah is an Israeli, I don't know which one came first, to be honest with you. This is an Israeli Haggadah. Why is it an Israeli Haggadah? The text of Haggadah is a Haggadah, but it's designed for the Israeli public. Okay? And I'll talk a little bit about how Haggadot have been designed and made, but how you know that it, the Haggadah as a book is frequently illustrated. It's one work besides Megillat Esther, which often has lots of illustrations. And those illustrations are obviously influenced by the era and location of the person who's doing it. So this Haggadah, you can tell it's an Israeli Haggadah, besides the fact that all the commentaries in Hebrew, in the modern Israeli Hebrew, is you have a picture, and those of you, I don't know how many can see this, but on one side is a bunch of guys heading towards Egypt, Israeli looking characters going off on vacation time during Passover. On the other side is a picture of Jews leaving Egypt during Passover, the Exodus from Egypt, which tells you something about Israeli society and the realities there. And so other aspects of it, some of the illustrations and figures in it reflect the Israeli scene. I just brought, I winnowed out. I had about 6 more Haggadot that I decided not to bring. Another very good Haggadah with a modern approach in the commentary, but the complete Haggadah is a Haggadah of Pesach by Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. He was the chief rabbi of United Synagogue of England or Great Britain. I'm not sure what it was, which, not to be confused with the American United Synagogue. That's an Orthodox organization. Brilliant speaker, wonderful speaker, and writes beautiful. And so his comments and translations are very nice. And the text is one. But there are, I don't know how many Haggadot. Walk into any Jewish bookstore and you will find dozens of Haggadot. Now, some are put out by Art Scroll. And so Art Scroll, all of those are put out by Art Scroll. They're going to have the Art Scroll text with the English translation by them. And then they will have different commentaries of various kinds. Some Hasidic, some other kind, but those are all going to be very, very traditional. And then I'm just saying, and the others, there will be reform and conservative and variance on the theme. All right. So if you have a family that doesn't really have a full command of the Hebrew and of the language that you're doing, it's very important you have the same Haggadot for everybody. If, on the other hand, you have a family gathering which everybody is very fairly conversant, and it's often very nice to have various Haggadot because of the commentaries and sometimes of certain things that might be in them that differ from one Haggadah to the other. But if it's a traditional Haggadah, the Hebrew text is almost always going to be identical. Even when I come to this Passover Haggadah that I'm going to give a hard time to. All right? So before the night of the Seder, go over the Haggadah yourself, look at it, make notes and things, suggestions of what you can do. All right. Now, the first thing, and I mentioned it last week, and it becomes an issue, is time frame. Traditionally, the Seder is not supposed to begin until the stars come out. So whatever your definition of that, some have it as early as 15 to 25 minutes after sunset, others 42 minutes, and some 72 minutes after sunset. And if you have young kids and anxious people coming to the Seder, that can be a problem. And then the length of the Haggadah is also a problem. So this particular one does make some suggestions if you want to shorten it, that it suggests a version, I would say it's not halachic, but it doesn't have all of the traditional aspects to it. They have a suggestion of how you can shorten and get the major points that are involved in it. Also, one thing to note, what one figure does not appear except by in passing in the Haggadah, who you expect to be there.
Elijah.
No? What?
Moshe.
Moshe is not in the Haggadah except as part of a quote. Right? Why is that? Most likely because they want to emphasize that it is God who is operating in terms of Passover. It insists that it is God who does everything in order not to make Moshe the center of attention. And so that could be part of the rationale behind it. Again, the authors of this Haggadah suggests maybe we should put Moshe back in more extent. Be that as it may. Okay. Now, I've got it, like I said, I've got a stack Haggadah and highlighter all over the place, and I try to find different bits of information that I was not aware of. And there's an interesting note here, not that I was not aware of it, but I think it's a nice way of putting it. It says the obsessive search and destruction of chametz from our homes, right? Said you got to get rid of all the chametz. You can't see it. You can't own it. You can't have any benefit from it, any of that, right? He says here, as a spiritual as well as a ritual overtones. Yeast came to symbolize arrogance because the bread raised itself above the level of matzah, though it is only filled with pockets of hot air. The yeast is in Hebrew terms is often referred to as the Yetzer Hara, the evil urge. Now we have to have many of these things, right? You can't have good bread, without the yeast. It's natural to have the yeast on it. It causes to make the better quality of bread. Yeast also causes fermentation in wine. We don't forbid wine. There's a natural yeast that is part of the process of creating the wine. The yeast is what changes the plain juice, into wine. But if you're not careful, it can cause it to go sour. Vinegar. Right? So there's a story that says that one time the rabbis sought to capture the Yetzer Hara, and they succeeded. They grabbed a hold of it somehow. It's an anthropomorphism. Don't worry about that part of it. But they got a hold of it and put it in a cage. So what happened? No children were born. No animals gave birth. Crops didn't come into being because that which is also part of the nature of the Yetzer Hara. Because all of these things, it's not the act in of itself. It's what it can do if not done properly or not contained properly. The urge, the lust, men and women for each other, procreation, all of that is healthy and good, but it can be also used in a bad way. So they had to let their Yetzer Hara go. All right. According to the Talmud, it says but it had to promise not to try and get Jews to worship idols. That was the deal they made with the Yetzer Hara. That's why they let it go. Be that as it may. So there is a common, like I said, common traditional understanding that chametz represents the Yetzer Hara, the evil urge. All right. And also think about it for a minute. What does yeast do? It consumes the sugar. It eats it. So it's in a sense very nature is destructive. Right? And so we want to emphasize the constructive and not the destructive at Passover time. All right, so now we're ready to get the house is clean, everything is set, the sun is about to descend. It's a weekday night, like Sunday night this year. Isn't it Sunday night? So it's time to light the candles. Now remember, when you light the candles on Shabbat, what is the order of the procedure? What do we do first? What?
Shabbat came first.
You light the candles, and then you cover your eyes, and then you say the bracha, right? Lahadlik, you light them, cover your eye. Lahadlik ner shel Shabbat. Take your hands away, and you see the candles. Why do we do it that way? I know it's all the way back into the fall here, because once you accept it at Shabbat by saying the blessing, you can't light a fire, can't transfer a flame. Therefore, you have to say the blessing after you've already lit the candles. But on Yom Tov, you're allowed to transfer flame. And so the proper order is to say the blessing and then light the candles. Unless it coincides with Shabbat. Then we follow the Shabbat rules. The second night of Pesach, candle lighting is not until the time that you're supposed to be able to start your Seder. You're not supposed to prepare for the second night before that time. Mm-hmm. So it's always a rush to get the dishes washed or wherever, and then get table set and what have you after candle lighting the second night. And one way of resolving that issue is you move to Israel and only have one Seder, and then it takes care of all that. All right. Also, because it's Yom Tov, the blessing is Asher Kiddushanu Mitzvotav V'Tzivanu Lahadlik Ner Shel Yom Tov, and the first night, and both nights we say the Shechianu. Okay. So most Haggadot after before the Kiddush have the Seder, the order of the Seder. All right. So if you can find the 15 steps of the Seder, Kadesh Urchatz. Anybody need some help on that? Yeah. Everybody find it? You're going too far already. Cool. Which one is the Kiddush? Yeah, should be before this. That will be, is it page 4 there? All right. The Reform Haggadah, so it may not be completely in it's just a thing. Whoosh, there's this. Do not see it.
I don't see it in here at all.
It's there.
Well, not this one here, I mean,
So just a second.
let's see. Let's see everything.
This is downstairs and not.
Oh, you're very well.
Yeah.
Ah,
See it right there.
people.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, he doesn't have it anymore. It looks like. Where is it? Yeah, it is. Right there. Everybody got one? All right. You find it?
Yep.
Oh. So it's 15 steps, most of them have it like that. There are variations of this, comes from the Middle Ages. This was not originally part of the Haggadah. Sorry, people over here on the line. All right, it was added, and there were some variations on this. So if everybody's got it, we will start either in Hebrew, transliterated, or reading the Hebrew itself. It's a very simple tune. It's Kadesh Urchatz Karpas Yachatz Magid Rachza Motzi Matzah Maror Korech Shulchan Orech Safun Barech Halel Nirtzah. Okay, so those I'll give you an outline of what's to take place. You have Kadesh, Kiddush. You make Kiddush first to start with. Urchatz, we wash our hands the first time without a blessing. Karpas, we have some kind of green herb, usually, to dip into salt water. Although you'll see people use potatoes. Why would you use a potato? It's supposed to be a green herb. I mean, celery is the one that most people don't like to use, and it's karpas probably means celery. I like green onions, so my wife has to give me green onions for my Seder table, right? That's because in Eastern Europe, they couldn't find green vegetables in April, March and April. And fortunately, they had potatoes, otherwise they starve. So with the potato, that became it. Just like if you're a vegetarian, vegetarians, so instead of a shank bone on the Seder plate, you'll use a roasted rutabaga or regular radish or something like that in place of the meat thing. Okay. Yachatz means we're going to divide the middle matzah. Magid, we tell the story. That's the major part of the Seder. It's only one word here, but it's really the major part of the evening. Rochza is a hand washing for the motzi, which follows motzi, and matzah, the blessing for the matzah. Maror, the blessing for the maror and eating the bitter herbs. Korech, the Hillel sandwich. Shulchan orech, let's eat. Finally, Safun, we complete the mid-dinner and eat the afikomen. Barech, we make Birkat Hamazon. Hallel, we read the Hallel, the praises to God, Nirtzah, and we complete the Seder. All right. So you should find right after this the Kadesh, sanctifying, the Kiddush. Now, many places, many families, the first, Friday night Kiddush, one person makes the Kiddush for everybody. And they may pour from their cup of wine to everybody having wine. There are different practices. And some people will have, everybody have their own wine. But for the Seder, everyone is supposed to have the cup of wine. And depending on your family's traditions or the families you're involved with, the traditions you're creating after you convert to Judaism, there's a leader who leads many parts, and everybody just listens. But when it comes to eating things, everybody has to eat. All right? You can say amen to a blessing, but you can't say I ate it without eating it. So there's no leaders for eating. All right. So the Kiddush goes over the first cup of wine. This year we don't have to worry about it. If it's Saturday night, there's Havdalah and everything's involved with it. We're not going to worry about that. But I just want to emphasize at the end of the Kiddush, if you see, we have the Brei Pri Hagafen and then the long paragraph of Kiddush. Everybody find that? All right. We have at the very beginning, Brei Pri Hagafen, and then we have Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Am, Hashem Yirshanu b'mitzvot ha'avati, ten lanu Adonai Elohim b'yava, moadim l'simcha, chagim I can't even read straight. This Yom Chag HaMatzot Hazeh, this holiday of Matzot, Zman Cherutenu, the time of our freedom, Mikra Kodesh, a holy assembly day, Chag HaMatzot, Zman Cherutenu, Kodesh, Zecher Memorial Yetziat Mitzrayim, going out of Egypt, Kivanu v'charta, you have chosen us, v'tana kidashta mikol amim, and sanctified us amongst all the nations, noadei kodshecha, in your holy festivals, the simcha v'sasanin chaltanu, gave us as ours for joy and happiness and joy. Baruch atah Hashem, praise you Hashem, mikadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim. Now this is important to take note of. The order, we did this earlier in the year at Sukkot and Rosh Hashanah. The order is Mekadesh Yisrael, God sanctifies Israel, V'hazmanim, and the holidays, the times. Because Israel, in the days when the new moon was proclaimed through the court, that determined when the holiday fell. Right? And the court you had to have the witnesses to see it. So it's the sanctification of people precedes the holiday. If the Beit Din decided that today was the second day of was not the first day of the month, but the 30th day of the previous month, and the Passover started a day later. So we have, but Shabbat is every 7 days. We have no control over that. So when Shabbat comes, you say Mekadesh HaShabbat. We don't say anything about Israel, but if it's Shabbat and holiday, Mekadesh HaShabbat v'Yisrael v'Hazmanim. Sanctifies the Sabbath, Israel, and the times. All right, we say Shechianu, and then we take a drink of wine. How do we drink our wine?
Leaning.
Leaning, which way? To the left. Even if you're a lefty, you're supposed to lean to the left, which causes my daughter-in-law great problems. But they claim, and I think there's some truth, that the way your esophagus is, that if you lean to the right, the esophagus is going to be down, and so when you eat or drink, you're more likely to choke on the food. All right? So then we have the first hand washing. There's no blessing with it, and we're not going to go over all the details of that. You look it up yourselves if you want. Commentary, we don't have time for that. All right, then we come to yachats. How many matzahs are on the Seder plate? 3. Oh, I'm sorry, skip karpas. First, let's do the karpas first, all right? So now, we're going to take some kind of vegetable. I already talked about potatoes versus green onions and celery. Going to dip it into the salt water, That's what most people have. And then you're going to say the blessing, Borei Pri Adama, and you have a bite of this fruit of the earth. Why do we start the Seder with this? Now, there is, I like to talk about truth with a small t and truth with a capital T. And usually the capital T means historical versus traditions. You will hear that the salt water that we dip the fruit in, or the vegetable, it's springtime, represented by the karpas, but it's in salt water to remind us of the tears of our ancestors and when they were slaves. But we know that it was not necessarily salt water. Some other, we could dip it in vinegar. And that was the way you started a meal. The way I like to explain it is we usually put dressing on our salad. They put their salad into the dressing. That's how you started a fancy meal. Gets interpreted over the course of ages to this springtime and to the tears of our ancestors. But we know that historically, the Passover Seder that we have is modeled in many ways on what was called a symposium. It was a Greek tradition that people would gather together and they would have wine and eat and talk philosophy or talk about different things that were important. That's why it's a symposium. And then after it was all over, they may go out gallivanting around and drinking and doing other not so good things. We'll come back to that when we talk about the Afikomen. Right? But the way they also started was with some kind of vegetation to whet the appetite before the main course, and you have your discussions and everything then the main course. Okay. And the word karpas probably comes from the Greek karpos, meaning fruit of the soil. All right. So now we take the middle matzah. We said we had 3 matzahs on the table. Why do we have 3 matzahs on the table? Don't we normally have 2 challahs? Why all of a sudden 3? What's Afikomen got to do with it?
Third.
All right, so you got the right direction, but give more to it. What do you mean?
Well, we're still gonna do the,
Not becoming broken.
All right, we take a matzah and you break it.
yeah,
All right, and one is set aside as the Afikomen. All right, that we're going to eat at the end of the meal. Okay, so how many matzot do you have left? 2.5. Okay, so that's our standard custom because you want to have 2 whole matzot because on Friday night you have to have 2 full loaves of bread to say hamotzi over. And if you start with 2 breads, 2 matzahs, and you break one, you won't have 2 whole ones. However, there's evidence, and the Vilna Gaon insisted you start with 2 matzahs because you're breaking part of the bread off. It emphasizes the poverty of Egypt. Mm-hmm. So, but the others, it became accepted tradition that we have 3. That's the standard tradition to have 3 matzot. So you have 2 whole matzot when it comes time for them blessing it. All right. And sometimes the Haggadah say break it in half and you put the larger half to the side, which makes no sense. If it's a larger half, it can't be a half. It's got to be. All right, break it. The larger piece is set aside for the Afikomen. Some people put it in a special holder. Some people hide it. Some people get their kids come and steal it during the course of the evening, and we have to buy it back from them in order to finish the Seder. All of that is meant to keep the kids involved. It's a long night for children, but you do things to help them stay with the meal. And the rabbis talk about all kinds of things that were done in order to keep the kids involved, because it's for the children as well as for the adults. Okay, so we break the matzah. Now it's called lechem oni. Lechem is bread, another proof that this is bread. Oni can have two meanings. Oni can be poor, and this is a poor man's bread. What is important when a person is poor? Generally speaking, they keep, they don't eat everything at once. They keep some for later on, just in case, the next meal doesn't come. So they never, they always save a little bit for later. So that is one explanation. It's all right. There's lechem oni. Now the word ani also can mean to relate to the word ania, to answer a question, la'anot. And it's the bread that we answer, or we tell the story of the Seder. And you will see, some Haggadah will tell you that for parts of the Seder, you have that broken piece of matzah visible, and other times you hide it. All right. But we, at this time, we're beginning the story. And we say in Aramaic, an invitation. Halach me'an yidachan v'tanam dar Mitzrayim, kol dichvin yete v'yevsach, yechol, kol ditzrich yete v'yevsach. Hashata hacha l'shana haba ba'ared Yisrael. Hashata avdei l'shana haba b'nei chorin. This is the bread of affliction, or poverty and persecution, as they would translate, that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Anyone who is needs, hungry, come and eat. Anyone who's needy, come and join in and celebrate Passover. Here now, in the upcoming year, in the land of Israel. Here we are slaves, now we are slaves. In a year to come, we should all be free people. So this is a general invitation. The idea is that you really should try to have people come to your Seder if at all possible, to join in. Now, one interesting fact is we call this lechem oni, poor man's bread. Why? Because that's what our ancestors ate in Egypt. But if you remember the story in the book of Exodus, why do we eat matzah? Everybody remember why it says? Yes.
Because they had to escape quickly, had to move quickly.
And therefore, they didn't have time for the bread to rise. They had to bake it. They said they baked it in the sun. So wouldn't that be the bread of freedom?
Yes.
So why do we call it the bread of poverty? Because I think because at the beginning of the Seder, it reminds us of the past servitude. At the end of the Seder, it now becomes the bread that we ate on our way out to freedom. So it transfers meaning from being slaves to being free people. And one discussion that is suggested by many authors and many modern Haggadot is to talk at the Seder for what does it mean to be a slave? Now, we understand human bondage, right? We understand that people have owned other people. And even today, people own other people in some societies. Also, slavery, there are different kinds of slavery. It was remarked, if a person barely has a living wage, are they, in a sense, in a state of certainly poverty often, and maybe even a sense of servitude? They have no choice. Or some of us may be slaves to certain habits and things that we do that we know are not good for us, are not healthy for us. They're not right. So to make it meaningful, one thing is suggested is you talk about what does it mean to be a slave? Right? And what does it mean to be free? What is the definition of freedom? How do you define freedom? Right? What does it mean to you? These are questions you can ask and involve. All right. So now what? Eved. The word Eved is normally used, translated as a slave. Avadim hayinu lefaro. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. All right. So now the word ayin bet dal, it means to work. And we know in biblical times there were two kinds of Eved. There was an Eved Ivri and an Eved Knani. Eved Ivri was an indentured servant, an Israelite who had to sell themselves for 6 years of servitude. Eved Knani was a non-Jewish slave, somebody from the outside of the Jewish world that was purchased. They were owned. There were human slaves in Israel of old. Right? Somebody who worked, but in at least in Mishnaic Hebrew, I don't remember if it's in biblical Hebrew, but by the time of the Mishnah, somebody who works for a wage is a poel. There's a different word. They're not an eved. Eved has this negative connotation. All right. Although the word will see other meanings to eved as well. Okay. So can everybody find the 4 questions? Manishtana halayla hazeh. This comes from the Mishnah. This is one of the oldest parts of the Haggadah. And in the Mishnah, that is the basis for this Seder that we have today, it says here that the son asks the father. And if there's no son to ask the father, the wife can ask the husband. If or the man asks himself these questions. And this is the way it appears now. It's changed a little bit. There's a modern Israeli tune that is used by most people today, which is Man nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halelot shebechol halelot anu ochlin chametz umatzah halayla hazeh kulo matzah halayla hazeh kulo matzah. However, there's an older version which has been replaced by the modern Israeli one, which is probably closer to the way it was originally done in Mishnah days. Mikol halelot shebechol halelot chametz umatzah halayla hazeh kulo matzah. So there are 4 questions, or are they really questions? We call them the 4 questions, but they're not. They're more statements. All right. And in the beginning of it, how is this night different from other nights? Is that a question? How is it different? Or how different is this night from other nights? Right? Meaning it's a statement. Look, this is what's different. On all other nights, we eat bread and matzah, regular chametz bread and matzah bread. This night, it's all matzah. On all other nights, we eat all kinds of vegetables. Tonight, bitter, maror. Well, that's not really quite right. We eat other vegetables, but we have have to eat the maror. And indeed, it was a tradition, according to some, that the first thing that was dipped in the salt water was a kind of maror as well. All other nights we don't dip even once. Dipping the vegetable into the water, to the salt water, to vinegar. We're going to dip twice. And the last one, all other nights we eat, whether we're sitting up or we're reclining. All of us recline. Now, these were changed a little bit in the Mishnah because there were some differences. One of the differences was that they always dipped the beginning. So it's all of the nights we dip once. Tonight we dip twice. Not only, right? Not the negative. And then the last question about reclining wasn't asked. A lot of people reclined. They're very wealthy, and that's how you eat your meals. So there, the Mishnah has the meat has to be roasted, meaning the Passover sacrifice had to be dry roasted. When there was no longer a Passover sacrifice, and we were only left with 3 questions, we had to have a 4th, so the 4th one got added. In the Middle Ages was challenged. Why do we recline? We talked about that a little bit last week. And there was some say you don't need to recline, but adds to the evening. All right. So we've asked some questions, and we're going to start telling the story. They're not really answers to the questions, but in part they can be seen as answer to the questions. So in the days of the Talmud, so we're talking around the year 230, 250 of the Common Era, the Haggadah did not yet exist. We had a framework, a basic framework, but it was clear that there were different traditions. And one of the oldest arguments about the Haggadah was what are we supposed to do at this point? One of the rabbis, Shmuel, said that we begin by saying we were slaves in the land of Egypt, which makes perfect sense. His compatriot, Rav, said, no, we begin by saying we were once idolaters. We worshiped idols. What is the greater shame, that we were slaves or that we were idolaters? Is it physical or spiritual? So not to ruin anybody's night, we say both. But we start with Shmuel. Avadim ayinu lefaro. Right, so and if we say that by the way, we're going to be reading the 4 questions the next few weeks. That's going to be our Hebrew practice. So I will send out a sheet with it for everybody to. All right, so make sure if you're asked to do the 4 questions, you'll be able to do it. All right, so we start with that, and then we turn to the idea that this is an obligation on everyone to tell the story. And that is, even if God had not taken us out of Egypt, we would still be slaves. And even if we're all wise people, wise men, learned, we still have to tell the story. So it illustrates that by talking about how the rabbis, even the rabbis of Bnei Brak, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon, they were gathered together around the table in Bnei Brak, and they would tell the story, and they were telling the story of the going out of Egypt all that night. All night long, they told the story. Until their students came in and they said to them, Raboteinu, Igi Zman Kriyat Shema Shel Shachari, rabbis, it's time to daven Shachris. You have to say Shema. It's almost sunrise. So if they can spend the whole night doing that, we can spend a bit of time doing it. And then we have the famous story of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, that he talking about the saying of it. I'm going very quickly, because the hour grows long. All right. But we're told the more that you tell the story, the better it is. Okay. And then we come to one of the most famous passages of the Seder, the 4 sons, or the 4 children. You'll see some preferring to make it a more inclusive. Echad, all right, Keneged Arba Banim Dibra Torah. The Torah talks about 4 kinds of children. Echad Chacham, Echad Rasha, Echad Tam, Echad She'ena Yodea Lisho. One who was wise, one who is wicked, one who is simple, and one who does not know how to ask. Now, I said this is one of the most popular themes to illustrate in the various Haggadot. And what you will see is that the artist, generally speaking, looks to their own era to envision, what does a righteous, wise child look like, or a wise person? What does a wicked one look like? Who's a more simple, and who's one who's just plain ignorant? I know it's in the Schechter one, but for example, at this table, you can't see there, but this illustration has the white. Comes from probably the late 19th century, or somewhere in the 19th century. because the wise son is kind of dressed like Eastern European Jew, a kaftan and kind of a some kind of turban-like thing on his head. The wicked son, which one's the wicked son? Who do you think?
Oh, sitting in the corner.
Smoking. The guy sitting there smoking. Okay. And then there's the next one to him is the one who is simple and the one doesn't know how to ask, can't lift his hand up, I guess is what it's. But this is some Haggadah in Chicago, 1879. But right, or maybe that's the father and the one in the corner with a yarmulke on, looking at the books is the wise son. Very popular Haggadah was Arthur VI. This is from Poland in 1939. I don't know if you can see it very well, but we have, again, the Eastern European Jew with the kaftan and all that. That's obviously the wise son. Dressed up like a bourgeois, middle-class German, in a hunting outfit, I guess, boots and all of that. And, that's the wicked son. And I'm not sure which is the wicked. This one, I guess, is simple, and this is the one doesn't know how to ask. Look at another couple of illustrations, and there's some very modernistic ones. That's what I'm looking for. And this one's from 19. All right, you can't really see too well here. But the four here are the Marx brothers. So Harpo is apparent. Groucho is the wise guy, I guess. Chico is the wicked because he's got all the gambling and everything. What have you? All right. And variations of themes. That, like I said, is very popular. And it tells you more about the artist and the age in which they are doing it than it does about the sons. All right. So anyway, so this is a very famous section, and I mentioned that so what does the wise son say? All right, everybody, can you find it there? What does the wise? They translate as child, so that we get the gender neutral. What does the wise child say? What are the testimonies, the statutes, and the laws which the Lord our God has commanded you? That's quoting Deuteronomy 6:20. What does he say in that English there?
Wise son asked, what means those testimonies, statutes, and judgments which the Lord our God hath commanded you?
Okay, and what does it have in that edition?
Let's see. Simple, so let's see. Oh. What is the meaning of the rules, laws, and customs which the eternal our God has commanded us? You explain to him all the laws of
Okay.
Passover.
Okay, stop. What's the difference between those two translations?
It's the same.
Oh yeah, but there's one very different, something very different.
Oh, the Paschal Lamb.
No. In the question, not the answer to the question. And laws, which the Lord our God has commanded.
You.
Which one is it?
One is you and one is us.
Ah, okay. Keep that in mind. All right. So you must tell this child some of the laws of Pesach. We do not proceed to any afikomen after eating the Pesach lamb. Okay. That's the wise son's question. What does the wicked child say? What does this service mean to you? Okay. This is the word avodah is used in a positive sense, but he's saying in a negative sense. Lachem velo lo, to you and not to him. Since he excludes himself, right? From the community and rejects a major principle of faith, you should set the child's teeth on edge and say, because of this, the Lord did for me when I went from Egypt. For me and not for you. Had that child been there, he would not have been redeemed. So what is the wicked son's problem? What is, if in one word, what is the wicked son's issue? You. God commanded you, not me. And they say, you give him a clop on the teeth, What are you talking? If you'd been there, you wouldn't have done anything. You wouldn't have put his blood over the lentils of the house. Lentils, not lentils. Lentils you eat, lentils are the house. You would have put the blood there. You have been stuck in Egypt. You, not us. Wait a minute, ladies and gentlemen. What do the wise sons say? In Hebrew, what does he say? Ma avodah hazot, I can't say, all right. Ma ha'edot v'chukim hamishpatim, where are the laws and statutes and judgments? Asher tzivah Hashem Elokeinu, which the Lord God has commanded etchem, you. Etchem, lachem, it's the same thing. They both mean to you. But we give the wicked son a hard time. The amount of ink that has been spilled over trying to discern these two. That's what I should think about. All right, got an answer? Anybody got an answer to resolve it? Well, I won't read you my entire paper, but simply when we look at the biblical passages, we look at the answers to the four sons. They are not identical. They appear there are four different passages. Some of them, the answers to bookmark here. Okay, Rabbi Berman, where's your? Did I bring the wrong one? Oh. Oh, you're right. I thought I put my bookmark there. $50. They did a much better job editing it than I did when I wrote it. All right. So this all comes from the fact that we have in Deuteronomy, we have says, when in time to come your children ask you, what mean the decrees, laws, and rules that the Lord our God has joined upon you? Or that's their translation, but that's the way it appears in the Haggadah. You shall say to your children, we were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt. God freed us from Egypt with a mighty hand. Long, long answer, which is not the answer given in the Haggadah. Okay? Then the next passage, comes from Exodus 12. You shall observe this as an institution of all time for you and your descendants. And when you enter the land that the Lord will give you, as he promised, you shall observe this rite. And when your children say to you, what do you mean by this rite? R-I-T-E. You shall say it is a Passover sacrifice to God, Hashem, because he passed over the house of the Israelites in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians but saved us. That's not the answer given to him. Now, some point out, he says, when they say to you, they don't ask, they say. So that already puts it maybe in something different quality to it. Then the next passage that we call the simple son is Exodus 13. When Hashem has brought you into the land of the Canaanites, he swore to you and to your fathers, and he's given it to you, and you shall accept it. Goes through a thing. When in time to come, your son asks you, what does this mean? You shall say to them, it was a mighty hand that God brought us out from Egypt, the house of bondage, and Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go. So again, that's not what we say here. Just a short version of that. And then finally, and the last part actually is also Exodus 13. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and the seventh day there shall be a festival of Hashem. Throughout the 7 days, unleavened bread shall be eaten, no leavened bread shall be found with you, and no leaven shall be found in your territory. And you shall explain to your son on that day that it is because of what Hashem did for me when I went forth from Egypt. There's no question. So it's what you will tell your son. That's one does not answer a question. That's the answer they give. So when we look at it and we see that the questions and answers are not necessarily exactly what appears in the Torah. And it is my contention that in order to make it work better, the author of this story, this midrash, has the wise son saying you, us, not you. And that's how we find it in a couple of sources. But somebody came along later on, some nice copyists, the copyists often do that when they're copying passages, and he looked at it, he said, wait a minute, he's misquoting the Torah. The Torah doesn't say us, it says you, etchem, not otanu, etchem. I'm going to fix it. So he fixed it. But by fixing it, it ruins the whole thing. That's why in their English translation of the yellow and red Haggadah, they have the correct Hebrew, but they change the English to make it work. So you can always be careful. All right, time-wise. All right. So that's my basic explanation for how it got to us the way it is today. But also, we generally speaking, some suggest, I think that's how Rabbi Sachs says, or else, we're not talking about real people. We're talking about ourselves. Sometimes we ask good, deep questions. Sometimes we don't know what to ask and what to say. Sometimes we rebel against what we've been given and taught. Sometimes we just go along without paying too much attention to what's going on. They could be all talking about us, as we are in different times, different stages, and even maybe different days of the week. So that's another way of understanding it. It's not meant to be a true thing. My oldest son takes it more literally. He says, it's telling him when somebody's so wicked that they separate themselves, don't bother trying to argue with them. But but he can't be that bad because he's at the Seder table. If he really was that rebellious, he wouldn't even be at the Seder table. So even the guy who's smoking, he's at the table at least. All right. So then we turn to, after the sons, we say, Baruch Shomer Haftachto, God, praise be he who kept his promise. And talks about how in every generation there are those who have stood up against us, and God saves them from their hand. All right, so that is all the first part of with Shmuel's. I'm not sure they have the same order in there. They may have changed the order. Or that's the first edition or the second one that RA put out. That's the second one. Okay, first one they put it all out of order. Okay, I was not to say they were wrong, but that doesn't fit the tradition. Okay. So now we go according to, we're about to do Rav's version of it. Rami Oved Avi, my father was a wandering Aramean. It was a big question. Who is the Aramean that they're referring to here? Is it Avraham? Is it Abraham? Is it Lavan, who sought to destroy Abraham? All right. Those are questions that are asked about what comes next. I'm sorry? The three are our fathers. Yes. Who are our fathers? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Who are our mothers?
Sarah, Rivka, Leah, and
Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. Okay. I was looking for something here. What was it? Syrian, yeah, there are different ways of translating. That note I had to myself. All right. So anyway, we're going to start talking about our ancestry, right? The history of the Jewish people. So my ancestor was a wandering Aramean. He descended to Egypt, resided there in small numbers, becomes a great nation. All right. So the question was asked of Maimonides. Maimonides, we've mentioned many a time. So this is the question. Maimonides wrote. He doesn't give us the question. He tells us the question, right? I received a question from Ovadia, the wise and learned convert. May the Lord of Israel, under whose wings he sought cover, reward him for his work. So Maimonides begins by praising Ovadia, who was a convert to Judaism. And he took the name Ovadia, Oved Yah, servant or slave, right, of the Lord. So he praises him. He says, you ask me if you too are allowed to say in the blessings and prayers, our God and God of our ancestors. You have brought us out of the land of Egypt. You have worked miracles for our ancestors. He says, can I say that? After all, I'm not descended from Abraham and Sarah. What am I supposed to do? Right? And maybe there's something else, right? So what does Maimonides say? Maimonides says, yes, is in the same way every Jew by birth says his blessings, you too shall pray. For Abraham our father taught the people, opened their minds and revealed to them the true faith and unity of God. He rejected idols and abolished their adoration. He brought many children under the wings of the divine presence. And then he quotes, for I have known Abraham to the end that he may command his children and his household after him, that they may keep the way of the Lord to do righteousness and justice. Ever since then, whoever adopts Judaism and confesses the unity of the divine name is counted among the disciples of Abraham our father. Therefore, you shall pray. It doesn't say you may. You shall pray, our God and God of our ancestors, because Abraham is your father. No difference exists between you and us, and all miracles done to us have been done as it were to us and to you. Know that our ancestors, when they came out of Egypt, were mostly idolaters. They had mingled with the pagans in Egypt and imitated their way of life until the Holy One sent Moses, our teacher, brought us under the wings of the divine presence, us and all converts, and gave to all of us one law. Do not consider your origin as inferior. There's an important lesson they have in this Haggadah. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm not sure where the answer to Shmuel ends or not at that earlier point, but now clearly we have Rav's answer with wandering, after we talk about the wandering Aramean. Say Elamad, okay, go and learn. Ma bikesh Lavan Arami lasot liYaakov. What did Laban, the Aramean, sought to do to Jacob, our ancestor? Sheparo lo gazar el al zacharim uLavan bikesh laroch et hakol shenema Arami oved avi. No, that Pharaoh did not decree against only. Pharaoh decreed only against the male children. Lavan sought to uproot everything, as it says, Arami oved avi. An Aramean sought to destroy my father. So this is Midrash. So we have the passage of the Aram that talks about the Aramean. Aved Avi can mean my father was a wandering Aramean. It could be a reference to Abraham. It could be a reference to Jacob. But the Midrash plays on it and says it was Lavan. Lavan Arami. Now, one thing that we note, we're now making Lavan into this big villain. You know, he's not a nice guy, but he wasn't such a villainous guy. But Lavan Arami sounds a lot like Romi, the Roman. And it's suggested that the roots of this midrash may go back to the time when the Ptolemies still ruled over the land of Israel, before the Seleucid Assyrians took over the Arameans. And the basic story is about Egypt and how terrible they were. Well, you know, you got these rulers in Egypt who are your rulers and you're their subjects. Do you really want to give them such a hard time? So maybe, you know, hit up the Aramean aspect of it, which are the Seleucids, which are the enemies of the Ptolemies. Or the Roman thing, the Jews wanted to say against Rome. They couldn't really say it against Rome, so they could say it against Lavan Arami, and everybody knew what they were talking about, hint, 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 that sort of thing. But anyway, what now follows for several pages is interpretation, elaboration on this passage of the wandering Aramean, and how Israel was brought down into Egypt, and they kept their identity, they kept their language, and plays on the subjugation of the Jews in Egypt, and posing hard labor, separating men and women, so that are making everyone so tired that they didn't have the energy for sexual relations, is one of the things that the rabbis point out. All of these things are play on it. There's a famous midrash that says that when Amram was married, right, he had two children. He had Miriam and Aharon. And then comes a decree to throw all the male children into the Nile. So Amram separated from his wife, Yocheved. Some of his wife, Yocheved, yeah. And the story goes that this is a version of it. He says, we give here a free adaptation of their midrashic dialogue. Miriam, where are you going with those leaflets? Amram's replies, we're holding the founding meeting of the Jewish ZPG Society, Zero Population Growth Society. All Jews must stop having babies. Miriam, but you always said you wanted a big family. Look how much we all love my baby brother Aaron. Amram, that was before Pharaoh issued these horrible decrees. He says that all baby boys must be thrown into the Nile. I'm not going to bring a baby into the world to suffer such a horrible fate. Even if he somehow escapes, what kind of life does this world offer him other than endless slavery and indignity? Miriam, but you're worse than Pharaoh. Amram, how dare you make such an accusation? Miriam, but it's true. Pharaoh has only decreed against the male children. If your efforts are successful, not even female babies will be born. Amram, but what good are females without the males? Miriam, that's what you and that stupid chauvinistic Pharaoh think. But in God's eyes, all represent the image of God. Perhaps through the merit of righteous women, we will be redeemed. At any rate, we will have to keep on making Jewish babies no matter how dark the prospects and leave the rest up to God. That makes sense. I'm going to call off the meeting. Go tell mommy we'll be drinking our best wine at dinner tonight. Okay. But that's obviously a play on how they worded it. But there is emphasis that this role of Miriam, early role of Miriam, we have also midrash that talk about the women going out to the fields and bringing food to their husbands and playing games, what have you, and one thing led to another, and Israel multiplied and grew mighty. All right. So we're now up to the 10 plagues. Right? God's strong hand, his outstretched arm, and his little finger. So the passage that we haven't quite finished talks about these things. God took us out from Egypt, et cetera, et cetera. Outstretched arm, and each one of these are meant to illustrate different aspects of the plagues. Now, before we go through the entirety of the plagues, it says, "Uvmoftim zehadam," signs. This is the blood. Kamashane'amar, as it is said, "Vanatati moftim b'shamayim u'va'oretz." I've placed my signs in the heavens and in the earth. Dam va'esh v'timerot ashan. Okay, so these three items reference the plagues. And so there's a tradition at this time, we take some of the wine out of our cup, either with your finger or a spoon or what have you prefer, when we mention each one of these. And then when we come to the 10 plagues, listing them one by one, each time we mention one of the plagues, we take out the wine. And then we have Rabbi Yehuda, that Rabbi Yehuda gave them a simanim, the tzachadash biachav, to remember the order of them. We take it out too. So there are 16 drops of wine that are removed from our cup. Now, there are various ways of treating this and understanding it. My favorite way is saying that we take the wine out because our cup of wine, our cup of joy, can't be full when other people are suffering. Even though they may have merited it, even though this was a righteous thing, nonetheless, there are people who are being harmed. Now, traditionally, I don't say put wine back in to fill up the cup. I don't. I think it should be taken that way. Now, and we see this illustrated in another aspect of our celebration. One of the major ways that we celebrate the holidays is when we say the Hallel, the full Hallel. Okay? When it's Rosh Chodesh, we only say the half Hallel. We skip some parts. The last days of Pesach, we're told we don't say the full Hallel. We omit parts. And therefore, the intermediate days also, we don't say the full Hallel. Question is why? Now, it could be because the last day is not the same level as the first day. On Sukkot, each day has got its own particular sacrifice style with it. Pesach's different. There may be some historical reasons for it as well, but a suggestion given by the Chafetz Chaim, as a matter of fact, is that the last day of Pesach, the 8th day of Pesach, 7th, 8th day of Pesach, we have the story of the dividing of the sea, and Israel passing through in safety, and the Egyptian soldiers being drowned. And there's a midrash that says Israel starts to sing. Az Yashir Moshe, they have the song that we sing in the sea. And the angels in heaven wanted to sing as well. And God says, no, my children are dying. You cannot sing. So therefore, we cut our Hallel short. And this is not from some liberal left-wing sage. This is the Chafetz Chaim, a well-respected Orthodox authority, whose work the Mishnah Berurah is standard for guidance. So we have a quip in the name of Golda Meir that whether I don't remember no real source of it, but she's quoted as saying, we can forgive the Palestinians, our enemies, for killing our children. We can't forgive them for making us kill theirs. Right? So the humanity is expressed that. Right? And right now, we really need to remember that when everything is going on. All right, the next follows a something most people have no idea what's going on. Rabbi Yossi the Galilean, I like this translation, posed the riddle. How do you know that God struck the Egyptians with only 10 blows in Egypt while God struck them with 50 blows at the Red Sea? So he answers this question, the solution. That's why I like this translation in this case. In Egypt, God used one finger, just as the Egyptian magician said to Pharaoh, this plague is the finger of God. But at the Red Sea, God used the whole hand. All right? Israel saw the great hand that God used against Egypt. Logically, if one finger produces 10 plagues in Egypt, then a whole hand will produce 50 plagues. Okay, so that's a little play on a riddle. I like that interpretation. It's a riddle. Okay? So now Rabbi Eliezer, not to be left out of this story, poses a riddle. Wait a minute. How do you know that each of the 10 plagues in Egypt is really 4 plagues rolled into one? In Psalm 78:49 says, God's burning anger at the Egyptians is described with 4 synonyms: wrath, indignation, trouble, and a band of deadly messengers. Each of the plagues must have had 4 dimensions. Logically, God stuck 40 blows in Egypt, 4 times 10, just using one finger, and 200 blows, 4 times 10 times 5, at the sea using his whole hand. Rabbi Akiva, wait a minute, guys, I can do you one better. How do you know 10 plagues in Egypt was really 5 plagues rolled into one? He quotes the same psalm, but he divides it a little differently. He says there are 5 synonyms for anger. God afflict his burning anger upon them, wrath, indignation, trouble, and a band of deadly messengers. So logically, God, 50 blows in Egypt, 250 at the sea. So what's going on? Is it just a game that they're playing? Yeah, in part, perhaps, to keep interest going when they originally came up with it. But also, it says in the Torah, if you observe my laws, my Torah, the plagues that I brought upon Egypt, I will not bring upon you. So what's better to say, that God brought 10 plagues on Egypt? Or that God brought 250 and at the sea 250? Okay? The more you escape. So one question that is associated with Pesach, and when you read the whole story, God hardens Pharaoh's heart. Now, when you read the story carefully, you will see that I think it's the first 5 times, I don't remember offhand, it says Pharaoh hardened his heart. Only at some later stage does it say God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And the Sepharno, one of the medieval commentators to the Bible, he's 16th century, says, why does God end up hardening Pharaoh's heart? So that Pharaoh wouldn't submit simply out of a pragmatic desire to end the pain of the plagues. The plagues were a call to change of heart, not only of policy. God was anxious to accept the true repentance. So in order to make sure it was true repentance, he had to keep going. And others suggest it was so they get all 10 plagues had to be there to fulfill the divine wish. Otherwise as well. We're up to Dayenu. Very popular. Ilu hotzi anu mi mitzrayim dayenu. Or you have to get all the words in properly. You can't sing it that way. If God had brought us out of Egypt and not afflicted them with judgments, it would have been enough. If God afflicted them with judgments and then not done it with their pagan gods, it would have been sufficient. If he did the pagan gods, etc. Goes through all these different stages. Simple question: would it really have been enough? Would have been enough just to leave Egypt? What about the getting of the Torah at Sinai? What about the building of the temple? All of these different things. So the idea behind it is we should be thankful for each and every thing that comes our way. And be prepared to accept that as being sufficient for our lives. By the way, if you know the songs and those who have songs, often that helps keep things going in a nice way. We usually sing most of Dayenu. So there's a song, and then there's a prose version of that. And now we come to the central core of the telling of the story of the items. The Mishnah says that Rabbi Gamliel said, anyone who doesn't mention these three things, the Pesach sacrifice, who doesn't mention these three things on rather the Passover sacrifice, Elu Pesach, excuse me. I'm not looking at English, I'm looking at Hebrew. Who does not say these three things on Pesach, he's not fulfilled his obligation. And these are Passover sacrifice, matzah, and maror. So we have 3 paragraphs. Each paragraph explains Pesach. Why do we have that our ancestors ate in the time of the temple? What does it serve, or what does it symbolize? And it reminds us that God passed over the houses of Egypt. But do we have a Pesach sacrifice at our table today? I hope not. So we point to it at the Seder plate, but we don't touch it or pick it up. When we come to the matzah, we pick up the half matzah that's left. All right, you pick it up. This matzah, because we still have the matzah. Comes to the bitter herbs, we pick up the horseradish or whatever you're using for the bitter herb. And say those we pick up, but the representative of the of the Passover sacrifice, we don't pick up. All right. So then every generation we have to thank God, and then we sing the Hallel. We start the first parts of the Hallel before we eat the meal. Once we then have that second cup that we've been hanging around. Ashkenazic tradition is we lift it and we say the Brei Pri Hagafen, the blessing over it, as well as the blessing over the recitation that we just recited, and drink the second cup of wine, at least half of it. Okay? And then we are going to have the meal. But before the meal, what's the first thing we eat at a meal? Matzah. So, but this is special matzah, right? This is the matzah that we have for the Seder. So before we eat bread, we always wash our hands. So this time we wash our hands with a bracha, with a blessing. And then usually just the leader of the Seder has the 3 matzahs, or actually 2 whole matzahs and the broken one. So when we say the hamotzi, we hold all of them up. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. When we say the blessing for eating the matzah, we drop the bottom matzah. We don't hold that up. And we say the blessing of Sher Kidsham Mitzatav B'Zivano al Achilat Matzah. with the whole matzah and the broken one. And then we distribute those to everyone to have a bit to eat. Right? So that we have the matzah. We don't have the korban pesach, obviously, but we do have the bitter herbs. And so we take some of the bitter herb, the maror, we dip it in the charoset, and we're supposed to shake it off. I don't have a real good reason why we do it. According to the Talmud, it's because of to get rid of worms. I don't know. But in any case, we dip it, but we shake it off, and then we recite the blessing, Asher Kiddusham Yisotav V'tzivanu al achilat maror, because we're eating maror as a mitzvah. So therefore, we have a blessing for the eating of the maror, the mitzvah of the maror. And then we eat it, but we don't recline. Right? The matzah we recline, the wine we recline, the bitter herbs we don't recline. And finally, because there was a difference of opinion, we like to follow what Hillel said, even though that's not the halacha. It says, Hillel said you had to take the matzah and the maror and the Pesach offering, and you ate them together because their matzah was really a soft matzah, not like ours. It was more like the pita, just didn't rise. And you wrap them together and you dip it into the charoset again, and you say, Zecher Mikdash ki Hillel, as a memorial to the temple like Hillel. When this is what Hillel used to do in the time the temple existed. He would wrap the Passover and the matzah and the maror together and eat them together to fulfill what it says in the Torah. Al matzot morim yochalu, on matzot and the bitter herbs you shall eat them. Then you have your meal. What? B'tei Avon, ken, B'tei Avon, Shulchan Aruch, Shulchan is all right. So we eat the meal. Some eat hard cooked eggs at the first course. Some eat potatoes as a first course. Some then, after you have your eggs, you might have gefilte fish. Then after your gefilte fish, you might have soup. And after soup, you have the main course and the things that go with it. And then desserts. It's all very good, but boy, am I full by then. And then we're going to have the afikomen. Okay? Now, the afikomen represents the Passover sacrifice, which we don't have. So it's the last, in the days of the temple, all these you really weren't supposed to eat that much because your main course was going to be the Passover sacrifice. Assuming you didn't have too big of a crowd, so you couldn't get enough to eat with that. So we eat the afikomen in place of that. And it's called the afikomen, but it's weird. First of all, afikomen is not a Hebrew word. All right? And even the Talmud recognizes it, but kind of plays with it. It probably derives from a Greek word, epikomios. Epikomios, which the Talmud kind of reflects, it means to go out afterwards. And as I said in the symposium, that this was in part patterned after they finished a serious night, they would go out and singing in the streets and getting drunk and maybe visiting the local bordellos, whatever you have. And so when it says, Ein maftir nachar Pesach afikomen, we don't add after the Pesach going out like that. That's not our way. That's what it really means. So, but we've transferred that to that piece of matzah that we eat at that time, and it's called the afikomen. Right? That's the last thing you're supposed to eat that night. Okay? Then we have filled the third cup of wine. If you want to drink wine during the course of the meal, that's fine. But between cup 1 and 2 and cup 3 and 4, you really shouldn't drink any extra wine. We then recite the Birkat Hamazon, the grace after meals. When we finish the grace after meals, we have what is called Kos Eliyahu, Elijah's cup. What is that all about? the standard answer given is that Elijah visits every household. That's why we go and open the door around that time, so he can come in and get his sip of wine. He must be drunk by the time he gets here from all the way from Israel to North Africa and Europe, New York, then up to Toronto and whichever direction he goes. But the most likely reason is that there's a dispute as to whether or not we're supposed to have 4 cups of wine at the Seder or 5. Because there's a verse that talks about taking us out, and bringing us into the land of Israel. So the standard interpretation was that we have 4 cups of wine. But just in case, the custom arose to pour a 5th cup of wine. And it's called Kos Eliyahu because it's in the Talmud. When the Talmud doesn't reach a decision on an issue, it often will say the word teku, which is really an abbreviation for tekum. It stands, means there's no answer, but it's usually spelled Tav Yud Kuf Vav with a little slash. I don't know why, but that was there. So, and pronounced teku. And somebody said, "What does that mean?" It means Tishbi, Yavo, V'teretz Kushiot V'She'elot. The Tishbi, Elijah will come and explain all the difficulties. So it's called Kos Eliyahu, because Kos Eliyahu would say, he'll come and he'll say, "Elijah, are we supposed to have 4 cups of wine or 5? And Elijah will say, 4. Good, I only drank 4 cups of wine, made 4 blessings. If Elijah says 5, we'll say, good, see, I had 5 cups of wine at the Seder. Why do we open the door? It's not to bring, it probably not to for Eliyahu, but it's a reflection of, in the Middle Ages, the fear. This year is an unusual year that Easter and Holy Week does not coincide with Pesach. Most years they coincide. And there's the old blood libel that Jews killed Christians and used their blood in the matzah. That's why some communities had the custom of only using white wine at the Seder. And the opening of the doors to make sure nobody's put any dead bodies out there. There was fear. Pesach was rejoicing, but also was a time of concern. And that's why there's a passage, that God should pour out his wrath upon the nations that don't know you. It's a cry of bitterness against those who have sought to destroy us. Right? It doesn't mention anybody by name, but those nations that sought our destruction. So now we pour the 4th cup of wine, we recite the Hallel, which is followed by a very long blessing, which is the end of the Psukei de Zimra on Shabbat morning, Nishmat Kochai Tevarech Shimcha, all the way up to the Shochenad. And we finish with the blessing for the Hallel. We then have a concluding piyut, a concluding statement. Where is Nitzah in here? Oh, they have it later on, huh? Well, some people put it later on because of a bunch of the songs that follow. Yeah, traditionally at this point, we say, Chasal Siddur Pesach Yuchato, we finished the Passover according to all its laws, judgment, etc., etc. The Shana Haba Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. And then come all the songs. They moved it to after that. These songs are all from the Middle Ages. They were added on to the Haggadah in part, again, to keep people alert, ready for the end. I mean, for all the 4 cups of wine and the heavy meal and all of that, you're kind of getting tired with it. So these were added. Some of them have nothing to do with Pesach. Some of them do reference Pesach. Echad mi yodea, who knows one, is just a number game thing. If you like, there's the Uncle Moshe version of it. Who knows one? I know one. One is Hashem. One is Hashem. One is Hashem. Who made the heavens and the earth? Ooh, ah, ooh, ah, ah. Who knows two? I know two. Two are the luchos that Moshe brought, and one is all right. Okay, et cetera, et cetera. Erecha mi yodea.
Remember?
Oh, yeah.
And the most famous of them is Chad Gadya, one kid the father bought for 2 zuzim. Again, has nothing to do with Pesach. There are attempts to explain it, but Chad Gadya, Dizavina Babi Tresus, Chad Gadya. And it's it really it starts with God. The father buys a kid for 2 zuzim, a goat. And then along comes a cat and kills the goat. Then it comes the dog and gets rid of the cat. And then comes a stick and gets rid of the dog. And then comes a fire and burns the stick. And then comes water, puts out the fire. And then comes an ox that drinks up the water. Then comes the angel of death. The shoichet that slaughters the ox. Then comes the angel of death who kills the shoichet. And then comes God and he gets rid of the shoichet. End of the story. End of the angel of death. There are attempts to make it fit the stories. Those are fun if you want to spend time with them. But it's really just kind of a late medieval nursery rhyme kind of a thing, numbers game, like Echad mi yodea. Second night of Pesach, at some point in time, we traditionally count the Omer. We'll have to talk about counting the Omer later. And it's 9:15, actually 9:17 already. So are there any questions of this quick model Seder that we had tonight?
Judea comes from the word Jordan, right?
The word Yehuda, Judah, became then the express Yehudim in Latin Judea. And in various forms that's how Jew descends from that. Right? Because we even though we probably are not all from the descendants of the tribe of Judah, because there were others there, even though that escaped from the Syrians, but that's pretty much soon to be, because Mordechai is said from the tribe of Benjamin, right? All right. Okie doke, as I say. All right, ladies and gentlemen, have a good night. Yeah, I want my Haggadot back.
You got it.
Good night, everybody.
Very much.
Hey.
One last year.